Millions watched, but the truth remained behind closed doors. The shocking story from Beverly Hills. Prologue. I have been working as a journalist for many years, and I have witnessed numerous stories that made front-page news. But some events remain in memory forever. This case is one of those. It intertwined wealth and power, family secrets and tragedy, public attention, and personal experiences. When I first heard about the murders in one of the Beverly Hills mansions, I could not imagine it would turn into a multi-year saga discussed across the country. My notes from the courtroom, conversations with relatives, lawyers, jurors, and witnesses formed the basis of this narrative. This is an attempt to show the process from the inside without exaggeration or embellishment, but with all the human complexity I observed daily. Chapter 1. The call that changed everything. I remember that evening when the phone rang in the newsroom earlier than usual. The message was simple yet horrifying. A man and a woman had been found murdered in a luxurious Beverly Hills mansion. When I arrived, police and forensic experts were already on site. Neighbors stood aside, whispering, trying to recall when they last saw the homeowners. The crime scene looked ordinary. A large living room with sofas, a TV, a coffee table with magazines. And yet 2 bodies lay on the carpet, blood, scratches, traces of panic. In the first hours, there were few facts, but one thing struck immediately. Nothing had been stolen. Jewelry, money, personal items, all were untouched. It didn't look like a robbery, and this immediately changed the direction of the investigation. Another surprising element was that the sons of the victims were the first to arrive. Young men who seemed shocked and anxious on TV footage had themselves called the police. Their initial testimonies appeared sincere and emotional. They spoke of shock and loss. The public initially sympathized. The family appeared successful and exemplary. But a few weeks after the tragedy, the situation changed. The press noticed that the sons were living actively. New luxury items, trips, expensive purchases. This raised suspicions. Instead of silence and mourning, people began to ask whether the close relatives could be involved in such brutality. The police began examining details carefully, and initial suspicions started to take shape. For a journalist, this was the beginning of a long story full of nuances and surprises. I remember several journalists arguing near the fence, trying to uncover every small detail. Someone asked about possible family conflicts, someone about financial issues. The police gave only general comments, repeating that the investigation was ongoing. Meanwhile, local residents recalled with horror their encounters with the family. Some said the family never showed emotions. Others noticed signs of tension. For me, as a reporter, it was a clue. It's important to look not only for big facts, but also for subtle signals. Chapter 2. The family facade and the search for truth. On paper, the family appeared perfect. The father a businessman who had built his career and earned respect among colleagues. The mother a homemaker who took care of the home and social events. The children successful, well-dressed, with a network of acquaintances. This facade attracted media attention. Photos from family holidays, evening receptions, vacations. Such images sold more easily to the audience than complex stories of internal conflicts. Investigators began interviewing relatives, friends, and employees. Gradually, other versions emerged. Those who witnessed strict upbringing described the father as stern and controlling. Others insisted he demanded discipline, but did not cross boundaries. I visited courtyards and cafes where people who knew the family gathered. Confusion was evident. Some believed in a crime for profit, others in a tragedy of psychological abuse. For me, it was important to note not only the sensational stories, but also small details. The words people chose, whether they recalled specific family incidents or only general impressions. Sometimes, a tiny fact, one instance of humiliation, a remark helped to form another understanding of what might have happened behind closed doors. During conversations with relatives, tense moments occasionally arose. Some wanted to speak only on camera, others asked certain things to remain off the record. I respected these requests because I knew real people were behind every story. One of the victim's aunts asked me to listen. "Don't make this a TV show," she said. It was one of those phrases that stayed in my memory long after the verdict. Additional accounts from relatives and friends began to fill the picture with more human details. Some said the family's display of wealth and success was partly public theater, Others called it the result of work and sacrifice. The more I spoke with different sources, the clearer it became. A simple explanation, money or revenge, did not account for everything. The true story consisted of numerous small details, often hard for the human eye to notice. Chapter 3. Investigation, Evidence, and Assumptions. The police worked meticulously. They examined phone records, checked financial transactions, and documented traces at the crime scene. One key piece of evidence was records of large expenditures after the parents' deaths. Buying a car, paying for entertainment, expensive purchases. These data seemed like simple numbers in the files, but for the prosecutor, they were significant. They could indicate a motive. Beyond finances, investigators focused on the chronology of that night. Who entered the house and when, what calls were made, whether there were attempts to hide traces. Even small inconsistencies in testimonies prompted deeper investigation. I observed how the investigation took shape, step by step. Each fact either disproved or reinforced a version. Arrest decisions emerged during the investigation. Seizure of evidence, fingerprint analysis, review of surveillance cameras all gave the sense that the case was moving toward court. But even at this stage, much depended on interpretation. The same detail could serve as evidence of guilt or, conversely, be considered insignificant. Evidence often lay in papers no one reads at home. But for investigators, it carried far more weight than headline emotions. The thoroughness of the detectives was impressive. Every trace had meaning in the overall scheme. I often saw seemingly minor details trigger a reassessment of investigative theories. It emphasized the importance of meticulousness and patience, even when the press demanded quick results. Chapter 4. Arrest and the first court days. When prosecutors filed charges, it shocked some and confirmed suspicions for others. The brothers, previously appearing as the children of successful parents, were now in custody. I was in court during their first appearance. The atmosphere was tense. Cameras, photographers, people waiting for news. The prosecutor calmly stated his case. This was a planned crime motivated by financial gain. His arguments were concise: financial operations, the defendant's behavior after the tragedy, possible signs of preparation. The defense offered another story. It was a reaction to years of humiliation. This opposition became the foundation for the upcoming trials. The first days involved preliminary hearings, motions to admit evidence, disputes over the admissibility of certain testimonies. In criminal proceedings, which evidence is allowed is crucial, often determining whether the prosecution can build a convincing narrative. During one of the first open sessions, I saw the defense attorney calmly and methodically build a chain of explanations for his client. He spoke about childhood, about how the father controlled money and decisions, about small humiliations that accumulated over years. It was an attempt to create a human portrait, not to justify murder, but to explain why someone could reach a psychological breaking point. Chapter 5. Testimonies that shook the courtroom. One of the most critical parts of the trial was witness testimony. People who knew the family, witnessed events, or could provide technical information were called to court. Often, the jurors' understanding depended on the witness. Some described a scene of warmth and luxury. Others spoke of tension, that the father could be stern, sometimes harsh. A few testimonies hinted at systematic humiliation, forming the defense's narrative. In contrast, the prosecution presented receipts, witness statements from shopkeepers observing expensive purchases. One vivid moment was a cross-examination where the defense attorney asked simple questions about childhood. The witness's answers revealed small details that later gained weight in understanding family dynamics. For jurors, it was a moment when the paper facts began to show a human story. A particularly memorable testimony came from a neighbor who recalled the night when screams were heard. His voice trembled as he recounted the event. Such moments affected people in the courtroom. It reminded everyone that behind the legal case, real pain existed, and regardless of the trial's outcome, that pain remained. Chapter 6. Psychological Evaluations and Explaining Behavior. The decisive part of the case was the psychologists' and psychiatrists' conclusions. Experts explained mechanisms that develop in people growing up under constant pressure. They discussed post-traumatic reactions, defense mechanisms that could lead to aggressive behavior. These were scientifically grounded explanations, which lawyers used to argue a compelled nature of the act. but science has limits in court. The prosecution insisted explanations did not absolve legal responsibility. They cited examples: people who endured unpleasant events but did not commit violence. A complex debate arose. Where is the boundary between explanation and excuse, between past difficulties and personal accountability? These debates were crucial for jurors. They had to assess not only facts but also the defendant's motivations and mental state at the time. For me, it was a key lesson. A fair trial is not just arithmetic of evidence, but the ability to evaluate human complexity. Before the debates, I spoke with several psychologists outside court. They explained that thoughts of justice and revenge could combine in complex ways under intense stress. This was not an excuse, but an explanation of psychology in crisis. Lawyers tried to make these explanations understandable so jurors could grasp the subtlety of behavior. Chapter 7. Media Circus: How the Press Changed Its Role. The case became a media spectacle. Television broadcast critical moments. Experts gave commentary, and social media began shaping its own versions. The media did not just report, it created meaning. Sometimes it felt like pressure, other times a source of important information. There were questions. Does constant broadcasting interfere with the court? Does it affect witnesses and jurors? The law and society sought a balance between publicity and justice. In this case, the balance seemed fragile. Too many viewers, too many opinions at once. I often saw journalists discussing tiny details during breaks: the defendant's reactions, the attorney's appearance, whether a witness seemed convincing. It was part of the work, but sometimes exhausting due to constant repetition. The media actively sought sensationalism. Daily stories appeared, talk shows invited experts and eyewitnesses, keeping the topic in the public eye. Critics argued the trial became a performance. Supporters said transparency helped control the system. In my reports, I tried to balance facts, context, and human emotions. Chapter 8. The Jurors Who Decided the Fate. The jurors were the body rendering the final decision. Carefully selected and screened for bias, their job was difficult. They had to process massive amounts of information, listen for hours, and then make a moral decision. In the first trial, the jurors could not reach a unanimous verdict. This reflected the difference in interpreting the facts. Some saw logic in the material motive. Others found the arguments about prolonged psychological pressure sufficient. Simply put, the first verdict revealed that society itself lacked a single opinion. Working with jurors is an art. Lawyers studied their reactions during questioning, observed how they responded to evidence, and tried to reinforce their own arguments. During breaks, many jurors stepped outside and spoke informally. Occasionally, I overheard one say, "We are human, but we must decide the fate of others." This burden was visible on their faces. The inability to reach a verdict in the first trial highlighted the complexity of the evidence. I remember one juror leaving the court and telling reporters, "We weren't ready to decide such human fates based only on papers." It served as a reminder that behind legal procedures are living people with doubts and fears. Chapter 9. Verdict and Life After the Headlines. When the verdict was announced, life imprisonment without parole, the courtroom was silent. Many felt relief that the case had a legal conclusion. Yet, at the same time, there was a void. Neither the verdict nor the trial could restore the lives of the victims. Those on both sides left with their sense of justice. Post-verdict, appeals began. Lawyers on both sides challenged procedural errors, the admissibility of certain evidence, and other technical aspects of the trial. While appeals rarely overturn the main facts, they often clarify procedures and define the boundaries for accepting evidence. I followed each stage carefully because these legal battles determine whether parties' rights were violated. Years later, I received a letter from one of the lawyers involved. He wrote about the impact of events on participants' lives, about the quiet fatigue that remained. His words reminded me that behind dry protocols are humans, and sometimes legal verdicts cannot encompass all human aspects. Chapter 10. Aftermath, a tragedy that raised questions. After all events, there remained a sense that truth in this story was layered. There is documentary truth, court verdicts, papers, protocols. There is human truth, what participants felt and experienced. And there is media truth, how the story was told to millions. They do not always align. Culturally, The case inspired several documentaries and articles where journalists and filmmakers tried to understand the nuances. Some focused on victims' perspectives, others on justice. Importantly, the case increased awareness of domestic abuse and how the system can better protect those in difficult relationships. For me, the story was a reminder. Justice is an ongoing process, requiring not only procedures, but also understanding human complexity. Another effect was a shift in public discussion. People spoke more about identifying and investigating psychological trauma, and about boundaries where trauma could serve as explanation for criminal actions. Discussions in universities, legal forums, and public hearings encouraged reviewing approaches to handling victims and preparing jurors. I consider this a positive change. Even painful stories can inspire improvement. Over the years, articles, analyses, and critiques emerged. Some pointed to systemic flaws. Others noted society misinterpreted signs of trauma. Case archives became the subject of academic articles, law school discussions, and documentary material. After years of observation, I saw how the topic returned in different formats: documentaries, magazine articles, and research in law schools. Some drew conclusions, others preserved memory. For me, it was important that the story not become just clicks, but remain a reflection on justice and humanity. Ultimately, this story taught me to value nuances and to responsibly present every fact to the public. That is my perspective. Epilogue. After all events, the sense remains that the truth of this story is multi-layered. There is legal truth, court verdicts, papers, protocols. There is human truth, what participants felt and experienced. And there is media truth, how the story was presented to millions. They do not always coincide. This case left a noticeable mark on culture and discussions about domestic abuse, psychological trauma, and the justice system. For me, as a journalist, it taught me to value nuances and see humanity even where it seems everything is reduced to dry facts and numbers. And although many years have passed, the memory of this trial reminds me, behind every sensational story are real people whose narratives cannot be ignored. Subscribe to the channel. Share this video. Give it a like.